wife!
You should have thought about your wife before.
I'll do anything you want! Just stop going! Oh, for Christ's sake!
Don Clemente sends his regards.
So obviously 7 years has passed since the original Mafia, so a lot's different, you know. The game looks completely different. It's from a completely different generation of hardware, you know, so that's the first thing people are going to notice. The second thing people are going to notice, I think, is the production quality of the VO, the direction and that sort of stuff. Obviously the guys at 2K, they're super talented, and the same guys worked on the first game is working on the second game, but hopefully with working with 2K Games, we've been able to add that extra quality, you know, and you're going to see that through the cinematics and stuff like that. Of course, as well, another big thing that we've worked on is creating this much bigger, much more expansive sandbox for the game to take place in. You know, the game takes place in Empire Bay. It's twice as big as the original city, you know. There's so much more to do than there was in the original city. And that's one of the other big factors. And then I think thirdly, the other factor is the combat in the game now. It's more like a third-person shooter than it is an open-world game, you know. Once you go into these big interior environments, they're full of dynamic objects. They're full of the details that you'd expect in, say, another big game, maybe like Gears of War or Uncharted, you know. And to have that in a sandbox is something really unique that we think Mafia's doing. So the story of Mafia 2, it follows this guy called Vito Scaletta. Now Vito is an Italian-American immigrant who's born into a life of poverty. And ultimately that's what sort of drags him towards this life of organised crime. Now Vito's just returned from the war at the start of the game, and he gets easily led astray by his best buddy Joe. And that's how they sort of embark on this sort of life. Now the game's set in 1945 it actually starts, and it finishes somewhere in the mid-50s. And it's a really nice setting. The early parts of the game are set against this winter backdrop. And as I've just said, you know, it's a sort of bleak time in Vito's life, you know. He's come back from the war, he's poor, he has nothing going on for him, you know. So, and the winter really, really plays into that. But as Vito sort of works his way up the ranks, becomes a made man, you know, things start looking up for him. And the second part of the game, the 50s section of the game, is set in this sort of summertime city with it's really bright, you know, there's lots of stuff going on. Our inspiration is things like Rebel Without a Cause, you know, it's the birth of rock and roll, all this cool stuff that the 50s is all about, you know, it all can be found in Empire Bay. First things first is to say that Vito isn't a commander, you know, he doesn't order these guys about. He's the lead character in the game, so naturally he takes the first role, and then any wingmen that are with him kind of provide the supporting role. They'll intelligently use cover behind, provide covering fire, and they'll shoot enemies on their own, but they won't on their own go off and try and complete the mission. You know, one thing we wanted to do is we didn't want the player to suffer from, say, the AI running away and then getting shot and dying and that being a game over moment. Now, the way the mission sort of works as a structure is a particular story beat or mission is a day in Vito's life. He wakes up in the morning and maybe he plays out this part of the mission for three hours, and then maybe he doesn't do nothing for 2 months, and we time jump that, you know, we say Vito and we fill in why maybe he's had to lie low, you know, he's just burned down a whiskey distillery. It doesn't make any sense for Vito to then go off and go murder somebody else, you know. These guys are not like mass murderers, they're mafia guys, you know. And the types of missions that you have, obviously the game has a massive amount of driving in it. It does. The Empire Bay is a huge place, so you're going to have to get from one side to the other, you're going to have to drive away. Police car chases, things like that coming out. Your AI wingmen will sort of fire out the windows. The pedestrians and things like that will react differently to Vito. At the start of the game, if you're going around your local neighbourhood, people know you, they know you by your first name. Later on, they're like, Mr. Scaletta. And nobody messes with you now. People respect you. You're a made man in the Mafia. So Mafia 2's being developed for 360, PS3 and PC for a simultaneously ship in early 2010.